Two questions for you, and I hope to get, if answers are short enough, to Dr. Bechet and then Dr. Bernstein. Chair Rouse, many American workers and families are concerned about high prices at the grocery store and the gas station. What's your assessment of inflation right now? What's the best way to fight it?
Okay, I guess I'm still on. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So we understand that inflation is affecting consumers' pocketbooks with higher prices at the pump, grocery stores for various goods. Our view is we expect inflation to moderate over the coming year because we believe that the factors that have been causing high inflation will begin to ease as COVID cases gradually decrease. You know, inflation is fundamentally a mismatch between supply and demand, which has partially reflected a change in demand as consumers have shifted their spending to goods. So what we need to do is we have to, to accommodate demand, we know that we have to have increased supply. Producers have been increasing their prices because of the constrained supply. So we need to ensure that the ports are strong and that we have robust investment in our infrastructure. I will say in the short term, this really is in the purview of the Federal Reserve, which is why confirming the nominees is so very important. The administration is doing what it can to increase supply chains, to get more workers back to work, including truckers with apprenticeship programs and other efforts. In the medium term, the competition agenda is so very important because we know concentration in concentrated markets that gives supply, that gives some price pressure for firms. It reduces innovation. It can cause lower wages for workers. Importantly, the president's economic vision of investing in infrastructure, in people, and ideas is really the long-term solution, building economic capacity for addressing longer-term price pressures.
Thank you. My friend and colleague, Rob Portman, called the bipartisan infrastructure bill a deflationary bill, that it will help drive down prices for American consumers. Do you agree with that?
What I agree is that the bipartisan infrastructure law it makes critical investments in our roads, ports, bridges, broadband, takes lead out of pipes. Those are important investments which increase our economic capacity. By increasing capacity, we can accommodate more demand, and so therefore it helps to ease inflationary pressures.
Thank you. Dr. Bechet, your work as an economist is focused on how we fix problems with inequality in the economy, whether by race, class, or gender, or even where you live. The stock market always seems to bounce back first from a downturn, while the lowest paid workers who experience the biggest job losses are also the slowest to reap the benefits of the economic growth that they essentially created. How do we ensure that economic recovery reaches all workers, from steel workers in rural Ohio to newly unionizing baristas at Starbucks, and not just those at the top?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That's a great question, a good place to start. You know, the President has been very clear on this issue. In fact, in his address to Congress last year, he said that his economic agenda focuses on building an economy from the bottom up and middle out, and really making sure that we see strong, stable, and shared economic growth. And that is why it was so important when he first came into office to focus on getting our economy, addressing the pandemic and getting us back to full employment. That's why the American Rescue Plan was so important. There's charts behind us that show some of the successes, getting 6.7 million workers into jobs. And importantly, many of the gains, particularly in wages, have been felt by workers at the bottom end of the wage spectrum. So when you get folks back to work, it has this pulling up effect. Now, of course, that hasn't solved all of the issues around inequities, and I want to point out a couple other things that we focused on early on. One thing that the administration focused on was making sure that the PPP program, the Payroll Protection Program, actually went to those who needed it the most. And there's now research showing that actually once the administration came into office, more business owners of color and women were able to access that program. So that's one way. And what that shows is that you actually need to have a focused attention, which is why President Biden has, as Chair Rouse said, these whole-of-government approaches to equity, to addressing climate change, and to issues around market structure and competition. Because it is only through making sure that all of our policies are focused on both being inclusive and making sure that those at the top are not able to be unduly rewarded, will we be able to have that kind of strong, stable, shared growth. I want to just end with a couple of notes to echo what Chair Rouse said. I mean, certainly the bipartisan infrastructure law is an important down payment on equity in a variety of ways, but I cannot stress enough how important Build Back Better is, that more fulsome agenda to make sure that we are addressing the needs around care and climate across the U.S. economy.
Thank you, Dr. Shea. Dr. Bernstein, quickly, and sorry, there's not a lot of time left. The pandemic revealed longstanding weaknesses in our supply chain, as you know. What should Congress and the administration do to make supply chains more resilient and bring prices down for consumers?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As was mentioned, the administration is already engaged in working with the ports, in working with the trucking sector, doing all we can to help ameliorate some of these pressures that are showing up in our elevated inflationary reads. The ports of LA and Long Beach process 40% of the nation's containerized imports. They actually broke their 2018 record last year for annualized imports by 13%. The number of containers sitting on the docks that for 9 days has come down by 60%, and so on. In the interest of time, perhaps we'll be able to get back to this. But underscoring what both of my colleagues said, by investing in the nation's infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, electric vehicles, climate, we help to strengthen supply chains by onshoring some critical capacity that is now very much, for now, which are very much dependent on offshore arrangements. We also help to bolster not just supply chains, but build in the kind of resiliency that's clearly been missing. Certainly, microchips are a great example of that, and USICA is a very important policy solution in that regard.